Well,
Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning we have Dr. Dave Horner joining us from Texas. We have Curtis. I'm in frozen California. And Dave, you're in California too, right?
I am.
Dave, you're joining for us from your office there at
At Biola University.
Biola University. That's a nice office.
Yeah, thanks.
Dang. That's not a background. That's a nice
No,
that's your
that's it.
real.
Yeah, and actually, when I'm looking at you, I'm actually not looking at you. I'm looking past you at some mountains. And as a Colorado boy, that's good for my soul.
Nice.
Although I can't really see them today because it's kind of cloudy. But
That's cool.
But you take it on faith that they're there.
yeah, it's a great office because it's largely because of that. So I'm thankful.
Yeah, praise God. That's the San Gabriel Mountains, I think you're looking at.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, when I first moved here, I was a kind of a snooty Colorado boy. As I was a Colorado boy as well. I was not snooty as well because I'm not implying that you were snooty. But
Yeah, well, let's just get that
let's
clear
get that,
right from the
let's get
outset.
that clear. But I was such a snoot about Colorado's mountains that I saw these, and I mean, but now the Sierras are a different story.
They are.
I would say.
Well, I should I think maybe I assume you'll have JP Moreland on this show at some point if you haven't already, but he came to Colorado to recruit me to come out here. And he also had a speaking engagement, but his real reason was to come to recruit me to come out here. And so I said, well, look at these mountains that I've got here in Colorado, and I go fly fishing. I can be up and fishing in 20 minutes. And he said, and I've never forgotten it. He said, well, our mountains can't beat your mountains, but our mountains can beat your ocean. Okay, that's pretty good.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's all you can say.
Yeah. So, okay,
How did you look at him at that point? Were you just like, that is so deep?
Is that philosophy?
Well, Dave, obviously we've met you before, and we have this already. We have a warm connection here on this, and we asked you to come on and talk about your book and the story behind the book, and basically just read it to us. No, but so it's going to be a long episode, just reading. But I thought I would start off by just saying how I met Dave. I met Dave at Denver Seminary. This would have been 2000, so right after Y2K wiped everything out, and we just had candles there at Denver Seminary. This would have been January 2000, and and the lights still worked, and we were all just kind of disappointed because there was no Y2K and Jesus didn't really come back, and so we had too much emergency food stored up. But I took an apologetics course there at Denver Seminary. It was a January term, and Kate Wadler was the TA. She later went on to get a PhD in medieval philosophy or something like that, I think at Cornell. I know that she was studying at CU Boulder at the time with one of the medievalists up there, McDonald or Pasnow, I forget. And so that's how I met Dave, and ended up taking another course from you, social ethics, that spring, which was a wonderful course. I remember reading Stanley Hauerwas out there on the grass one time in this sunny Colorado day. And and then going up to Boulder with you and Kate on Wednesdays for the Day Spring course, philosophy of religion course, which was great fun as well. So I got to see Dave writing his dissertation there in the Dayspring house and sort of supervising and managing Kate. And I was kind of Kate's little lackey there. I think I took a couple classes. I lectured for her a couple times that time. I did the problem of evil. That was a really interesting and cool experience for me. And that's how I first met you. Took another course from you down at Biola when I came out here with my Colorado snootiness. And that was ancient and medieval ethics a few years later. And so anyway, known Dave now for 22 years, I guess.
Wow.
So
Hmm.
Curtis, did you have an anecdote or something before we got?
Well, let's see, I met Dave at Biola when you came to Biola to teach. I thought, oh, who is this new guy? Like, and how he's been recruited by JP. He's got to have something to say. And I remember thinking, he's from Oxford.
Oh. What a disappointment.
Oh, the many ways you've spoken into my life, Dave, seriously, in the classroom and out of the classroom. It's just been a great friendship and relationship that turned into a friendship. And I've really appreciated all of that. But I think I took every class that when you first got there, I took every class I could from you. I wanted to learn from the Oxford Don, the closest I could get to an Oxford Don. And I just soaked every bit of it up. We took, you taught Aristotle, history of normative systems of ethics. I was in the medieval philosophy class. It was just great. And then getting to help source different references and help organize a little bit on your book. I always thought it was really incredibly gracious that you even put my name in there. But because it was just an utter privilege to help the little bit that I did. I
really appreciated your help.
Yeah. Well, cool. And really, this is like your life work, and expressing your passion for college kids. And it kind of came out of your own story. That's what I loved about it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Dave, the first time I heard of Dave, I'm going to share one more warm anecdote. The first time I heard of Dave was when I was in high school. And I was at a guy's house. He's like a little Tolkien character. Well, to me, he felt like C.S. Lewis, and his last name was Lewis. His name was Gordon R. Lewis, and he was a high school mentor of mine.
Oh,
and he
wow.
was telling me about his students, and he said, there's this guy, Dave Horner, who's just fantastic. And he just gets it. He gets everything. And, he said, be like Dave Horner. He didn't say it exactly like that, but I just remember that name. And I remember him telling me about your ministry at Stanford and just college ministry stuff. And that he was so proud of you.
Wow.
And so Dave and I have the same mentor and teacher, Gordon R. Lewis.
Yeah.
And then Dave ended up being my professor there. So I was very well primed to pay close attention because Gordon told me many years before. And so I was paying extra careful attention. I'm really glad I did.
Well, thanks. I wish Gordon would have said that to other people. But at least you paid attention. And,
yeah.
That's great. In a lifetime, if you can get one student to pay attention, you're on the positive side of the ledger.
When I saw you working on your dissertation up there, that to me was so intimidating to look at. Like you looked you handled it with grace and everything, but it's not you. It was just that what you were telling me, like you were like, yeah, I basically have to write a second dissertation, and I've been working on this for years, and like if they don't like it, you just fail. I was like, wait, you don't get grades? He's like, no, you just write a book, and if they don't like it, you fail at the end. I was just like,
You put in all the
wait,
work.
what school is this? And he said, Oxford. And I wrote down, I think I wrote down Oxnard Community College on accident. So I was like, what did he say? Oxnard? What? So I looked it up on the internets. No, but it was Oxford. It would just look so intimidating, Oxford. And then when you passed, we were all really happy for you and relieved, and also kind of not really that surprised either, because obviously you put the work in. So anyway, okay, so we have this book called Mind Your Faith, a student's guide to thinking and living well. What I really love about this book is that you have in the very beginning a connection with loving God with all your mind, but then you get right into some basic epistemology, which I found the most helpful in seminary, which was when we got to the epistemology course. All of a sudden, just things fell into place for me there. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, the study of knowledge. And you have this chapter called The Truth About Truth. And then the next chapter is The Truth About Belief and Knowledge. And those are all epistemology words. We just wondered if you would mind taking us through some of that material, and why did you decide to put that stuff up front, relatively up front in that book?
Well, maybe I'll step back a little bit. I was, as you mentioned, from Gordon Lewis, I was in campus ministry work before I went into philosophy. So when I graduated from college, I had gone through a period of real doubt and questioning my faith and everything in college, and was greatly helped by exposure to what was very, at that time, quite undeveloped, the field of apologetics. Nothing like it is now. And so I didn't know what to do. I thought I would probably try to do something in that area, maybe, but I had no idea how to go about it. But I knew I did need to working with people. I love books, but I needed to figure out how to minister to people. So I went into campus ministry work, and ended up eventually at Stanford. And at Stanford, I would speak. We had a Marxist dorm on campus. It was run by a Marxist, and so they had sherry hours where they would supply the sherry, and a speaker would show up, and they would stick around. Students would stick around because there was sherry there, because they're intellectually hungry. And so I would go in and speak for 20 minutes and then take questions for 2 hours. And it was great. I thought, this is what I want to do. But I also realized there was so much I didn't know. And my good friend, Greg Gansel, who was at that time on the East Coast, we would write each other. We would send cassette tapes of our reflections to each other to listen to kind of think about, because years before, we had sort of plotted together. We thought, we would like to get into the marketplace of ideas directly. And we sort of pick up the pieces on campuses of people who are struggling or asking questions and so on, and we're kind of on the outside. We'd love to get on the inside. And but we didn't know exactly what to do. But independently, we discovered philosophy, as the field that got into that kind of stuff, and you could talk about it in classes. But also, I thought there are no Christian philosophers. And so this is like a hidden people's mission group, you know, and I'll probably be killed, martyred, but I'm going to do it.
Elizabeth Elliot.
Yeah. And my friends who were going on to grad school were all going to seminary to be pastors. And I had kind of thought, well, I guess that's what you do. Nobody was doing this. So Gansel and I kind of independently, but, you know, egging each other on, we both started pursuing this. And that's how I ended up at Denver Seminary to work with Gordon Lewis, because it was one of 2 seminaries in the country that actually had a philosophy program.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was in Chicago. This one's in Denver.
Yeah.
Okay, easy enough. You know, let me pray about it. Okay. So it was twice as long, and you had to learn Greek, but hey,
Praise God.
you know, and I'm really glad I did that.
Yeah, me too.
But
Yeah.
one of the things that got me there also was, while I was still at Stanford, I attended a conference on the Bible. It was a Congress on the Bible, they called it. Francis Schaeffer was there. Bunch of big dogs, and Denver Seminary had a booth, and there was this fiery little Italian guy who was manning the booth, and it turned out he was in the philosophy program, and he was a fighter, sort of a dude. He had worked for the mafia before he became a Christian. And so we started talking, and we got into this argument. He said, "You got to come to Denver Seminary." I said, "No, I don't." "Yes, you do." And he just starts nailing me, you know, and everything. I thought, whoa, this is pretty good. So that was another reason. So as soon as I got there, I got involved with this guy. He had an apologetics ministry called Christian Research Associates. So I plugged into that. And then eventually I ran that for a few years, and then ended up in Boulder with this study center that you mentioned, Lucas. And so what I wanted to do was to try to bring, to continue to work in philosophy, to get the highest level I could, but also to kind of bring together these 2 worlds of engaging students, helping them think about important questions well, those who are not followers of Jesus, to help them understand the gospel and the Christian worldview, those who are, to help them think through their faith, because, you know, I've witnessed a whole lot of shipwrecks, and a lot of them are it's just bad thinking. It's poor understanding of things like science and so on. And so with the study center, we were able to do both of those sorts of things. And so eventually, a colleague and I came up with the idea of having a kind of conference where we pull a lot of this stuff together. And I came up with the name for it, and I called it Universinity: How to Go to College Without Losing Your Mind, Your Faith, or Your Character.
That's good marketing.
Yeah. And I trademarked it right away. We thought somebody said, "Oh, that's good. Let's trademark it." So, but those 3 pieces: mind, faith, character. So I'm very slowly making my way toward answering your question, Lucas, as usual. And, you know, as somebody's really interested in ethics and so on, you know, in spiritual formation, I think that the character piece is really crucial. So I wanted to bring all that stuff together, and we did have several versions of that conference and so on. Well, then it turned out that both of us, the other guy was Gary DeWeese, both of us ended up coming out here to Biola to teach philosophy. And so we talked about maybe having, you know, kind of doing the conference, but Gary said, "No, we should write it into a book." And So I dabbled around with that, but I was busy doing other straight academic things. But then I lost my health in 2007. And I got to the point where I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but it turned out to be an environmental sort of illness thing, mold toxicity, and as it turns out, Lyme disease. And so I was just, I was desperate. I didn't know if I'd ever write anything again. So I had a summer of 2008. I was scheduled to give several talks at a C.S. Lewis conference in Oxford, and then to give a whole week of talks in Cambridge for an apologetics network. So like, this is the dream, boy, it just doesn't get any better than that. But it just became clear, especially given how moldy those places are, that there's no way I'm going to be able to do it. And so I emailed everybody. This is in like April of 2008. I emailed the folks and said, regretfully, I can't do it. And, somewhere around that night, I got up in the middle of the night to use the facilities. And this is the only time that I can think of where I had this experience, but it was like I had a voice. There was a thought that came into my mind just as clear as a bell. And that is, if you can't go to Oxford, write Universanity. Oh, okay. So that's really, the book is sort of like I was on a mission from God. It's like, if I can only do one thing, I want to help college students. I want to bring together this stuff that I've been thinking about and working through and testing and trying out on students and stuff over all these years. So that's how it happened. And so the epistemology piece is part of it. The book actually, the publisher didn't like the word Universanity, so we went with Mind Your Faith. But it does have those three parts: mind, faith, and character. And the mind bit, is foundational, and that's the more philosophical. Well, there's a lot of philosophical stuff, but I didn't want to use a lot of terminology because I wanted it to be used, for example, in courses that I teach here at Biola that are biblical studies courses and so on. So I wanted to make it very helpful philosophically without much of the terminology. And so, of course, like you, Lucas, I've found epistemology extremely helpful in terms of laying a foundation for being able to make the sorts of distinctions then that you can use when you start talking about faith and character.
Yeah, I remember when we were working together on it, and you had that singular focus. You had said a couple of times to me that if this is the only thing I ever finish, if this is the only thing, and because I remember a couple of times it was like, okay, I get the whole mold thing. Can I help with publishing some stuff that you don't have already? And you were like, none of it. This is the one thing.
Yeah.
I've got
and I really, and this is where you come in, because I could not read books at that time.
Right.
So I had no physical books. I was in an office with bare shelves, and so how do you do research? How do you look up all these things that you've collected, even if it's just that?
Yeah.
And so I needed you, and it ended up a couple other people as well to track things down and help me do it. So I couldn't have done it without you.
Oh, thanks. That means a lot. It was a privilege to help you, and sitting in on your classes during that time too. I was always struck with as you're going through and getting all these sources, I was just like, these kids have no idea the richness of experience that you're sharing with them right now. Because you shared a lot of firsthand experiences that you only get to read about, and so yeah, it was quite a privilege to hear those firsthand accounts.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, one in particular I think about is Anscombe, when sitting in court. That was a great story. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm even though I have no Irish in me at all, I'm always happy to tell stories. So.
Well, I didn't know if you were going to get into your health challenges, Dave, but that was an interesting take on it. I don't think I fully knew that. Maybe you told me that before, but
And Lucas, before I forget, because I'm of that age, can I insert one more thing related to that?
yeah, absolutely.
Because it's relevant to the genesis of the book. So right at the same time as I think the Lord just said, do it. I had, and I'll back up a little bit on it as well. You Lucas, you mentioned about feeling intimidated, with the Oxford thing. Well, let me tell you, you go over there, that's intimidating. And the British system is, if you fail at the end, that's it. And so
they kill you, right?
Yeah, something like that. Actually, when you do an exam, you have to wear your full regalia, and so this is for a doctoral oral exam. They have rules that you have to be more than a sword length away from your examiners, just in case one side or the other gets mad.
It's before metal detectors.
Yeah. But
you're walking in.
Yeah.
Oh, dang it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, they didn't quite have that in 1200 when it was founded, but they had plenty of, apparently, people pulling out their swords, in academic examinations. So
great inflation was a temptation even back then.
That's right.
For different reasons.
That's right. That's right. Oh, you don't like my grade? Okay. Okay.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
But I know this is true wherever, whatever graduate program, because there are all these really smart people there and all these high expectations. And
yeah,
it's intimidating, and you kind of lose your nerve. And I definitely felt that at Oxford, and so in fact, I think I'm still dealing with it. But you move from being a rather big fish in a small pond to being a very small fish in a big pond, and it's difficult to kind of find your feet. Well, that's the way it had been post Oxford for me. Because I was looking recently back and in some of my old stuff when I was doing that apologetics ministry, I was speaking 20, 30 times a month in different contexts and stuff.
How old were you when you were doing the apologetics ministry?
Later 20s.
Okay, I think that's helpful. Maybe get a timeline for people. So,
yeah. So later 20s.
You have later 20s, and you're not a total kid, but it's not like you're in your early 20s or something. So you're okay. Are you married at this time?
Yeah, I'm married. I have one child.
All right. So you're fully
in
on
seminary.
Yeah, you're bar mitzvahed basically.
Yeah.
You're fully. Now
I had facial hair.
Did you have sideburns?
I had a beard. I mean, I've had a beard almost since birth.
Now, so you were married. And now how old were you when you went to Denver Seminary?
I was, I think, 27 or 28.
Okay, so
So,
you're
and
doing
I
the,
got involved in apologetics kind of right away. So for the
Mhm.
next 4 or 5 years, I was doing that. I was doing a lot of speaking and
how old
stuff.
were you when you went to Oxford for the first time?
So it was, somewhere around, I guess, 35, maybe
Okay,
36.
so you're not like some young, you're, well, you're not right after undergrad is what I'm
Right.
trying to get
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't just go straight through.
Yeah. And, I mean, that was a big benefit to me. I mean, there are certainly downsides to it because you have less energy and time and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But on the other hand, a lot of the intimidation that some of the grad students felt, I didn't, because I was older and I didn't care as much.
Yeah.
Richard Swinburne, who was my initial supervisor, and he was a very intimidating person to most people. They were just cowering. And he and I became pretty good friends because I didn't, I don't need that. But I would say in general, I was plenty intimidated by the environment and the expectations and just the sheer amazing level of discourse and all that. And so I kind of lost my nerve in a lot of ways. When I came back, I wasn't sure how to write anything that wasn't kind of super technical, Oxfordish stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was the struggle. I mean, I think that was one of the big reasons why I didn't write Mind Your Faith earlier, is I didn't know how to write it anymore.
Now, how long did it take for you to get through Oxford from ages 35 to what?
Well, it took me 5 years of as a student, but in there, my wife got seriously ill, and so I had to take a year out, medical leave. So I think it was 6 years. It might have been closer to 7 years.
Okay.
But
I think,
I can't remember all the
now,
dates.
can you, I think be helpful for people who aren't familiar with how Oxford is different than the United States model. Here, you at Denver Seminary, you were taking courses like you normally think of. You take a semester long course, you have exams and papers and quizzes, and then you get a grade at the end. And then you take another course. Maybe it's more advanced, maybe it's kind of over here on the side. How is Oxford different for the PhD level?
Yeah. Well, in general, for everybody, all the way through undergrads and graduates, there really are no grades. So you have personal tutorials.
So that's
where
how
you
you
write
know
papers.
that's how you know if you suck, is it if they just tell you in the tutorial,
Yeah.
this
And if
sucks.
they don't, which they're, some do and some don't. But what you're doing is preparing to take exams at the very end. And so at the very end of your 3 years as an undergrad, you will put on your gowns and you will ride your bike in the examination schools, and you will get blue books and you will write out essays under time constraints, and then those are graded ruthlessly by someone other than your tutors.
And that's for the undergrad.
That's for the undergrad, but that's the way they've been formed. That's the way students think about things. So the grad is, so I did a master's degree and a doctorate there. So the master's degree was more like the undergrad thing. It was tutorial and then a set of exams at the end plus a thesis. And then at Oxford, they call it a D.Phil. The PhD is called a D.Phil. and it's pure research. So you're writing, you have an advisor, and that advisor might farm you out for different chapters a little bit. But then at the end, basically, you submit it, and you have two examiners who are not your advisors, one from Oxford and one from outside, and they say yay or nay. So it really, like the undergrad, but in a more intense way, it all depends on the very end.
How are those people chosen? Are they just randomly chosen?
You have a say in it. You can request people, and but before I went, quick story, before I went to Oxford, I taught in the Soviet Union at an underground seminary for a few weeks in the fall of 1990. So it was just before the Soviet Union fell. And I could tell lots of stories about that. Well, I came out of that and I visited different places in Europe that I was thinking about possibly going. And my family came and joined me in Germany. And we went to these different universities and ended up at Oxford. But before we went from the continent of Europe over to England, we stayed with William Lane Craig and his family, Bill Craig. And he was one who had encouraged me to go to Oxford. And again, at that time, there just weren't all kinds of people doing this sort of thing. So,
are there now?
Yeah. I mean, they're just,
Okay.
there are a lot of Christian philosophers.
Now, so that's a span of what, 30 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. When did Craig, where were you with Craig? Were you, what country were you again?
In Belgium. He lived in Belgium.
Okay. So he's in Leuven or
in
however you
Leuven.
say.
Yeah. So he was he's of course a phenomenon, but he could lecture in French, German, and English.
Yeah.
And so they lived there, and he was basically an apologist in Europe.
Yes.
And he was one of a kind. So there were several, and J.P. Moreland and I actually went back to 1970, which is another story. But JP was really coming into his own, and he was kind of a mentor to Gansel and me. And Bill Craig just came up on the radar. I'd never met him, but I wrote him, and he was helpful, and he encouraged me to apply to go to Oxford. So anyway,
these are all Biola professors, in case
but
you're not aware.
None of this happened at Biola at the time. I mean,
that's why that's why I pointed out. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that there are so many people doing this sort of thing now is Biola. It's just this movement that occurred really beginning in the mid 1990s or late 1990s. But
so there was no top down like Biola meeting in 1970
No.
that said,
no, if there were,
we need more Christian philosophers, ha ha ha, and
no, if there had been a meeting about it, it would have been voted down.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially at that time.
Yeah.
This was top down in the sense that it was from God.
From God, there's just no. In fact, when I was still working on my dissertation, and I had moved back to Colorado when we met, in that time, the last time I went over there during the summer to meet with my supervisor before I was ready to submit my dissertation, he said, "Do you have?" We went out for breakfast. He said, "Do you have any?" And this was not Swinburne for my D.Phil. Do you have any better job prospects? Because I was just cobbling together, teaching at Denver Seminary, teaching at Dayspring. I was a worship pastor in church. and I sometimes was working construction and putting up signs in housing developments. And I said, well, I have some friends out in California that have an MA program in philosophy, and they have 90 graduate students in their program, which eventually we had 140 out here. But, and he said, 90? Why, that's more than at Oxford. And Oxford is the largest philosophy faculty in the world. There are 80 people teaching philosophy at Oxford. And they have probably 40 grad students, 45 grad students. And that, was like, oh, wow, this is significant. But anyway, back to Bill Craig. He told me the story.
Yeah.
He told me, the next day we're getting on the ferry to go over to England, and I was going to meet with a couple of guys in Cambridge and 3 or 4 people in Oxford, including Swinburne. And Bill told me the story of his friend who had similar background to us, and went to Oxford, wrote his dissertation, got to the exam. A hostile atheist philosopher was one of his examiners, and he failed it. It was over. And it was super traumatic for this guy, for his wife. And so on, he eventually was able to get a PhD in the United States and have a very productive career as a philosopher. But anyway, so I knew that was a possibility, which increased the intimidation factor.
Yeah.
And so I would say, so by the time I started to work on Mind Your Faith, it had been 8 years or so since I'd left Oxford. I had written a number of articles in encyclopedia things and so on that were more academic. I just didn't know how to write, kind of at this level anymore. And so I've already described that kind of voice in the night, but then this is the other thing that happened right about the same time. I'm not sure exactly the chronology, but I got a letter from this woman whom I'd never met. And she said, that article you wrote, or those articles you wrote that were in this evangelistic magazine in 1990. So this is now, 18 years later.
She's getting her hair cut at a Christian barber. She's looking at the magazines that they keep there.
Yeah, actually, she said, I've gotten all the back issues I can. I give them away.
Oh.
And I've Xeroxed what, because they're gone now. So I've Xeroxed the, stuff. They're all beat up, and I'm writing you to say, are there any more? Mm-hmm. Now I'd basically forgotten I ever wrote these things, but they were, but I'll go back to it. So she said, she said, please keep writing like this for people like me. And what it was in 1990, I'm in Boulder.
Wow.
I thought, these hard questions that people have, maybe we should think of them not as problems to avoid, but as openings, to truth. So
yes.
I took this idea, the religious pluralism question. How can there be one true religion given all the options? And I just went straight into it and said, basically, how can Jesus be the only way to God? Well, let's look at the positive side of that. If that's true, there is a way to God. That's good news.
Yeah.
And if it's an actual way, then of course it's going to be exclusive.
Yeah.
I tell my students, we have this cabin in Colorado, our family. And when I invite people to come visit it, I say, well, here's how you get there. You take the road, left-hand
Right. Right.
down, and you get at the top of the hill. And I don't say anything about interstates in California or Broadway and New York or anything.
And no one interprets that as you being a Debbie Downer.
Yeah. I just
There's
say
one particular way to get there.
the only reason I mention this particular road is that's the road that goes there.
Yeah.
And the fact is, not all roads go there.
And this is good news. You can come up there and see
you can
me.
come up to the Horner cabin. And how much better would it be? Can you imagine saying, well, there's a cure for AIDS? But it doesn't matter if you take it.
There's only one way, though.
All cures are equal. Well, that just means none of them work.
Mm.
And so anyway, I wrote a series of articles on, kind of short things. The main thing on that, are all religions created equal?
That's what she was referring to.
Yeah, and then a sidebar on tolerance, and a sidebar on the blind men and the elephant.
What was the name of the magazine again?
It's called A Separate Peace, PEACE, and it was a publication of Campus Crusade. These articles have been translated into other languages, and in fact, the blind men and the elephant thing, it's still all over the internet out there. It's kind of funny, but anyway, I get this letter from her, just asking me to do it. And so as I did what I'm just describing right now, as I thought back, okay, what was I thinking when I did that? And how was I? Oh, okay. Well, that's the sort of thing I should do with this book. And it's kind of funny because she said, you've never met me, blah, blah, blah. So years later, I wrote her and I said, well, thank you for sending me that letter. And she's kind of going, what letter? She doesn't remember ever writing me or anything, but it was this thing, another thing, I think, just, what are the chances after 18 years, she's going to pick that time to write this guy she doesn't know. She tracked down at Biola and, ask him to do this. And again, she doesn't even remember. So I really did feel like I was on a, as the Blues Brothers would say, I was on a mission from God.
Mission from God. Yeah, that almost qualifies as miraculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave, there's so many things as I'm hearing you talk about this. You've brought up your health, you've brought up your unique educational experience, the names and people that you had the honor of being friends with and knowing. There's all sorts of things. I'm imagine that this might go into an archive and be found years later. And it might be points of this conversation that are interesting to people that you don't particularly think are interesting to the people. For example, the fact that she wrote you a letter. How did you, so I'm just going to ask you a few little cultural things for people later. How did you set up the meetings with people in Cambridge and Oxford when you were visiting Bill Craig? Was that all by mail or was that phone calls? How was that done? Because now it's so easy with email, but
right
back then it was not like that. So tell us how you got all on the same page as far as meeting in the same place at the same time.
Yeah, I think it must have been letters written. I kind of guessed, I sort of tried to figure out who might be good to contact. And they were quite gracious.
Mm-hmm. They would return your letter.
Yeah, they would write back. And then once I got over there, I phoned, once I got in the right kind of time zone and got a little bit nearer. If they had agreed to do it, then I think I had some phone conversations that to set the times exactly.
Yes.
And so on. In fact, they didn't all the phone conversations did not always go well. I mean, there's one bad example. So
These are phones attached to walls. Just
yeah, these are
FYI.
phones attached to
They're
walls.
not. No one's texting you or anything like that.
But Bill Craig had said, well, you should contact, and then another guy that had gone to Denver Seminary had also done a doctorate with Wolfhard Pannenberg. And so, okay, well, I'll give him a try. So I'm over in Germany trying to set up a time with Pannenberg on the phone.
Oh, wow.
And he insisted in only speaking German on the phone, even though he's probably speaks English better than I do. And so, you know, that was third grade level conversation, which so we ended up not having
Me,
yeah,
coffee, you, Tuesday.
yeah. What are you thinking about?
Beanstalk.
So anyway, but you know, the other guys, it was great. And a
Wow.
funny anecdote with Richard Swinburne.
Hmm.
I was thinking about doing something on the moral argument for the existence of God, because that I thought would be a nice sort of
Tell
blend.
people what that is. Just
Okay,
briefly.
so it's basically
well, first of all, the conclusion is that God exists. That's what an argument is. It's got to have a conclusion.
yeah,
And then the evidence has something to do with moral reality.
yeah, that's right. So it's basically the idea that maybe one way to put it, the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values and obligations and so on is that that reality is like that. And the best explanation for that is that it's created by a person, a moral person with moral reasons and intentions, and it has a kind of moral design. So molecules don't have moral properties and so on. So naturalism just does a really terrible job at grounding the existence of all this stuff. So it's actually something I'm now back at working on. I'm writing a chapter in a book on the history of the moral argument, published by Oxford. But you know, when I first was thinking about going over that, that's the sort of thing I want to work on. Well, Richard Swinburne doesn't like those arguments. and so we got into this big argument about it.
About the
in his argument in his office.
A different sense.
Yeah. And so he's just drilling me and I'm trying to respond. I'm figuring, okay, this is clearly I'm not coming here, but hey, I'll give it my best shot. Well, it turns out he really liked that.
Oh, okay.
And so he nominated me for a British government scholarship, which I got. And I got it because Richard Swinburne nominated me for it. So that's you know, one of the things about philosophy is having a good argument, you know, in the sense of getting into a good argument with someone can be a really great thing. And it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And that's something that philosophy can help in our present moment, I think, when people are just, you know, everything's a microaggression and everybody's worried about this and that, and we've got to be really nice to people. You know, you can be really gracious and loving and respectful to people and disagree with them and give good reasons for your position. And so,
you
yeah,
know,
sorry.
That just, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're touching on something I think that you delivered so well through my time with you and as a student. And that's that what you're doing in that moment when you're arguing with someone, you're exemplifying virtues and you're flourishing as a human person. And you can do that flourishing well, or you can do it poorly. Right. And so when you're loving and kind, you're showing courage, you're doing all this stuff, you're kind of living fully in a sense. And that's inspiring. And it was inspiring to Swinburne. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. So anyway, so that's another anecdote that might be interesting for somebody who ever thinks about doing something like this, that it actually, to my surprise, I mean, I left there thinking, well, that's the end of that. But he loved it.
Dave, what's interesting and compelling about your story is that you weren't one of these guys that went to college. You went to CSU Boulder, CSU Boulder. You went to CSU Fort Collins, right? For your undergrad. It's not like you came out of high school going, I want to teach philosophy and this is, going to do this step and this step. Some people do, but you went kind of this way and then ended up at this nice office at Biola. What was that like? I mean, you already said you're incredibly anxious and fearful at Oxford, but the whole journey seems kind of fraught with uncertainty.
Yeah.
And,
well,
looking back, would you do it the same way or?
Yeah, that's such a hard question to answer,
Well, I'll give you an easier question then.
But
why does your book not have any pie charts and facts in it? I'm talking about like, I don't see any like scatter plots just like there's no facts and there's no statistics. That's what I look for. I look for pictures and I almost threw it away, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
I did not see a single pie chart.
Yeah. I mean, that's a real weakness of the book. There's no question. There's
no science in it.
It would be utterly irrelevant
the science
to what we're doing. But yeah, so as soon as we ask what is science, we're doing philosophy, and there's no set of statistics or pie charts that can help you answer that question. Mm-hmm. What is science? So this is more that sort of book. People, who struggle with their faith because they think that somehow science has shown that it's false or something. That's because they misunderstand what science is and what it can do. Mm-hmm. As G.K. Chesterton said, when to the question, to the objection, well, science has proved that there is no God. He said, well, which experiment was that? That's clearly a misunderstanding of what science is and what science can do. And that's how philosophy is try to figure out, okay, what kind of questions are we talking about here? And again, statistics and pie charts just are of no help there. They're great when you're doing science, perhaps, but not when you're thinking about science. And so, yeah, I mean, I had no concept of this growing up. I would say I did have some really good things that I just didn't know the word philosophy to put with them necessarily.
Yes.
But I grew up in a church where the pastor actually was a clear thinker, and he gauged the text of scripture really well, but he also was able. He was conversant with other thoughts and thinkers, and I had a high school youth guy who had actually lived and worked at L'Abri with Francis Schaeffer.
Oh, that's cool.
So I had some pretty amazing things.
That's cool.
What was the name of that church that you mentioned?
It's called Calvary Church in Longmont, Colorado.
Is it still there?
Yeah. And the guy that was the pastor who was, I now realize was extraordinary. I mean, he was like 23 years old.
What was his name? Do you recall?
Leith Anderson.
Oh, no way. Are you serious?
Yeah. Wow. So he went on to bigger and better things, clearly, president of the National Association of Evangelicals and all that. But I mean, so I looking back, I realized, oh, wow.
Wonderful.
I was better educated than all my friends
Wow.
growing up just because I went to church.
Oh man,
And-
that's a huge point. I never made that connection.
Yeah.
I've known you 22 years. First time I've made that
Yeah.
connection.
So,
He was the
but
president of
I
Denver
didn't know
Seminary.
I didn't know the word philosophy so much. But then I started reading Schaeffer, and I loved what he was doing, and I was intrigued by philosophers, particularly the existentialists. But then I went to when I went to Colorado State, I took a couple of philosophy classes, but they were kind of weird, and they just weren't really doing the thing. In my family, my uncle was a theologian and was a liberal, and so I was certainly not encouraged to go down that path.
You mean he taught theology?
He was a how should I put it? He was a dean of a Presbyterian seminary. He was a missiologist primarily.
Oh.
Over in Africa, and he was at the Near East School of Theology in Beirut, Lebanon, and then an American Presbyterian seminary, and he was pretty liberal. And so my parents were not real excited about kind of that path.
Using him as a resource. Yeah.
And they didn't graduate from college, my parents. And and my brother worked with Campus Crusade and was kind of my chief role model. And he was,
what was his name?
Bob Horner, and he's just a star in that world, as doing speaking and evangelism and discipleship. And I so
older
respected
brother
him. Yeah, 15 years older.
Okay.
So
that's quite a bit.
So for me to kind of come to this way of thinking was really, it was just not something my family, I just had no preparation for it. And
besides,
and one of the things I had to do actually when I came to Denver Seminary to study philosophy, I got counseling about it. And my counselor said, you need to talk to your brother about what you're doing. And he may not like it, but if he can just understand kind of this different path you're taking. So we met at McDonald's for breakfast, and I laid it out, and he said, bro, that's great. That's great. Just don't get weird. As if
too late.
Too late. And he's been my biggest fan ever since. I mean, I can't say enough about how great that was. So our paths, which had really kind of been quite similar, now started, but great, great appreciation for each other and respect for each other and so on. He's still, we're still extremely close. And so, this is related to the fact that, and like I say, I met J.P. Moreland in 1970.
How'd that happen?
He graduated from college and came to Boulder to serve with Campus Crusade at the University of Colorado. And his director was my brother.
Oh.
And I was a junior high kid, 12 miles away. And so that's how we met.
It's a small world.
Yeah. And so
he obviously made an impact on you somehow.
Yeah.
At that age.
And
what was it about him that
well, I just remember
inspired?
meeting him,
Okay.
and he was a common name, and he was kind of a firecracker, and then he left, after a couple of years, he moved to Vermont, I think, and so on. But then when I went on staff with Campus Crusade, that was the campus ministry group I was at, where I met Greg Gansel. JP starts reemerging, and he was studying philosophy. And so that's when Greg and I both contacted him, and he kind of started mentoring us from afar.
Mhm.
Because as I said, there just wasn't, especially in our circles, there weren't role models. We
Yep.
didn't know that there were Christian philosophers. We
Yeah.
eventually came to discover, Al Plantinga and stuff.
He existed. Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically there was Al Plantinga, and then at Oxford was Basil Mitchell, whom I actually got to become, friends with, thankfully, but that was it as far as we knew. And then JP's coming up, and so he's kind of helping us. Of course, Gordon Lewis.
Yes.
And but Gordon Lewis's emphasis was more on New Age movement and cults and all that kind of stuff. So he wasn't kind of into the same sort of thing that like Al Plantinga was. But we're just we're finding our way.
Yeah.
Talbot, the Talbot program at Biola didn't exist.
No.
And in fact, another quick anecdote. So we had this study center in Boulder, and two of us are philosophers in it, Gary DeWeese and myself. And so JP would come out in the summers and teach for Campus Crusade in their summer Institute of Biblical Studies up in Fort Collins. So we would always get together. So I tried to recruit him to come to Boulder, to Dayspring. And so had him come down. He spoke in our church, because we started a church as well.
What year was this?
This
What year?
was, oh gosh,
Or roundabout?
maybe early 90s, something like that.
All right. So he
And
would have just
I
been
had him come and
starting
speak.
Biola. Yeah.
I had him speak at, this was before he came to Biola. He wasn't happy where he was. And so I had him, he met with Gordon Lewis and so on. But, it would be another gig of having to raise support and all that kind of stuff, because it was a hybrid deal between Denver Seminary and Dayspring. And, he wasn't into doing that so much anymore. He'd done it plenty. And plus he had a guy that, a colleague that they had just kind of decided they were going to go together wherever they went.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but anyway, he said,
yeah,
he told me that at that point, he said, there's a place, I can't tell you where it is, but they're talking about maybe starting a master's program in philosophy, a theological seminary. And so that's what I'm exploring right now. And that, that might be where I end up. And that was Talbot. So just like the next year, this program here started, and JP came in, and he and Scott Ray somehow convinced the administration that this would be a good idea. And, the rest is history. I don't know if that was, I think that was, it was early 90s, somewhere in there.
There were quite a few people doing philosophy that were not well known. They weren't really go-getters in terms of missionary.
Yeah.
I would say the Biola program is a explicitly missionary focus. I would say it's got that mindset, because we didn't even mention Dallas Willard, who is the reason why JP, and he was no spring chicken.
Yeah.
Even at that time, he had been around for a while. And Gordon Lewis has a book called Testing Christianity's Truth Claims, which the entire, as you know, the entire table of contents is different philosophers that had existed for decades, that he goes through, like Gordon Clark and J. Oliver Buswell and John Edward Carnell, those big names. But I would say maybe the analytic tradition, I think, is the in terms of breaking into PhD programs, specifically in analytic philosophy that had grown up you know, post Gettier and post logical positivism in the United States. Not so much focused on like the continental stuff,
Yeah.
existentialism, but it's an interesting story of how you got there. And I guess I wanted to also say about your health challenges, the tremendous, my heart went out to you so much when I had heard about the challenges you had, especially how torturous it must have been for you specifically with books. How did your illness affect your ability to deal with old books, like books you hold in your hand?
Yeah.
For a Oxford scholar who had been in the, how do you say it, the Bodleian Library?
Bodleian. Yes.
Bodleian. Did you spend much time in that library when you were there?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It's like the
Bodleian
best
Library?
place on earth.
Tell me about it. Describe it for people.
Well, it's multiple stories of these big rooms with huge, very high ceilings and windows. All the lighting is through, pretty much, I think, is window lighting. And it's, I don't know, I guess it's sort of like Downton Abbey or something like that. And then there are these different nooks and crannies, different rooms, and you can have, they call them reading rooms. And so if you want to read, and it's not a lending library, you can't take anything out of there. Most of the books, and it's, this is one of the largest libraries in the world. Most of the books are underground, and they're little men who live down there.
Oh, and so they're going along. Hello.
And so what you have to do is you fill out this. It may be different now. it was so
Where do you think
medieval.
Tolkien got ideas for Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, it was so medieval when I was there. And
I think the whole
90s.
thing's digital now. It's all digital now.
Yeah.
One of them escaped, and Tolkien was like, I have ideas for books
that's
now.
right. That's right. They're hobbits. That's what they are. And so you had to write out, and they would have pots. They would have ink pots, I guess they call them, on the so every reading room had a desk, and you'd go up there to fill your it could have been your quill pen.
Wow.
But your fountain pen, from this ink pot. That's
Whoa.
And but if you want a book, you figure out what it is, and they had card catalogs and so on, and they did have a computer thing where you could look them up, and you have to fill it out in great detail, and then you put it in a like a slot, and then you come back the next day, and as you walk up the stairs to these different rooms, there are these pigeonholes. And so you find the one, they're alphabetical, and you find the one that might have your book in it, your slip. And it will say, yeah, your book is up in reading room 3. So you go up to the 3rd floor to reading room 3, and you go up to the desk and you hand them this piece of paper, and they extract the book and give it to you, and then you have to say which seat you're sitting in case somebody else needs to see that book. So it's so old school, but just so cool. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it's like paradise. In fact, when I was ill, as I was one of the treatment strategies was a kind of neuroscience, kind of trying to reformulate your neural pathways and so on. That JP kind of turned me on to this, but this person that was talking to us about it, they said, now think about, if you were to be healed, if you were to be better, what would be this sort of experience that you could imagine to be sort of that thing that you look forward to? And it was, for me, it was to be in the Bodland, to be in those, one of those rooms. So yeah, for me, and my specialty is in ancient medieval philosophy. Oxford's a medieval university. I just love all that stuff. I love old books, and a bunch of my books came from Oxford, and they're full of mold, which is one of the reasons I got ill. But yeah, it was really hard. And I said to my grad students, well, I said to my undergrad students, I can't have books. I'm allergic to books. I can't have books. And they would go, then why are you assigning us all these books? And I'd say to my grad students, I can't use my books. And they would say, I'll take your books. So, but yeah, it was hard. And it was one of the things that was really hard is, that it lasted 12 years. And basically, I used to go to conferences and read papers and, be a fairly well respected person in a certain area, and be one of the players. And all that is pretty much still gone, although perhaps some of it's coming back a little bit. But it just, the loss, the sort of the loss of dreams and expectations, and kind of where you think you're going to be and all that kind of stuff. That's a hard part of it. And that's what you have to wrestle with the Lord about it, and realize, there are more important things than that.
So you said I noticed you said is the illness still there? Is it still with you?
See, the philosopher always was. You said was. What do you mean by was?
It was hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard.
So it still
so
hard?
in about 3 years ago, it had gotten so bad that I went on disability. I didn't think I could teach anymore. And so the spring semester of 2019, and at the end of that semester, I had an opportunity Biola was trying to get rid of people like me, old, expensive faculty members. And so they had a golden parachute sort of deal where, if you're old enough, you can apply to resign, and you have a year of pay and healthcare, and then you're gone, you're done. And I thought, what alternative do I have? I mean, at least that would be a good opportunity. But thing is, what am I going to do after that? I can't work. So how am I going to live? And my wife, who is much more spiritually sensitive than I am, she said, I think the Lord told me it's going to, this is going to be over soon. Okay, well, I'll trust your faith on this.
You didn't interpret that as you're going to die?
No. No.
America is ending.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That would be one that could satisfy that, description. But
okay, I'm writing that in my notes. Okay, he's not a communist. Went to the Soviet Union. Okay.
Yeah. But so anyway, I mean, that's a real long story, but through a combination of, I'd already done all the medical stuff that could be done that I knew of. I really wanted to pursue this brain stuff, because I knew, just what little I knew from what P had told me and so on, and had read, that's an important part of our health is, from a biblical perspective, we're, interdependent, integrated sorts of beings. We have a physical aspect for sure. We've got psychological aspect. We've got spiritual stuff. And I just hadn't explored these other things. And so I did a lot with, turns out a whole bunch of people with kind of my stuff had been really helped by the brain stuff, kind of practices to form new neural pathways and all that kind of thing. But then also the spiritual battle aspect of it. And so it culminated, started doing all that kind of stuff. I had to choose by May 3rd whether or not to accept the golden parachute thing. And my wife and I chose to attend a conference thing in Georgia where they do a lot of the spiritual warfare stuff, to leave on May 4th to go to that. And so
wow.
By faith, I did not accept the golden parachute thing.
Wow.
We went down there, and that really was the extra oomph I guess I needed. But she could really tell the difference over the course of the week. My voice changed. I can tell you that I just felt lighter and lighter and lighter every day. They were just doing a lot of spiritual battle sort of prayer stuff. So I came back and went to a bookstore. Wow, for the first time.
Wow.
In all those years.
In 12 years.
I can use, so you all the books you see.
Yes.
They're those are books that are, they're not in plastic bags. They are real books, and some of them are old books.
Praise God.
And so, yeah, it's just extraordinary. I can use a library. But I, kind of working through all the other stuff about it is still a process. Like, because now I'm older. What is it the Lord wants me to do? It'd be kind of nice if he'd do another one of those middle of the night voice things. And some lady would write me a letter. But yeah. I'm relearning, given the stage of life I'm in and so on. But it's coming back. And like I say, I'm interestingly getting quite interested in the moral argument stuff, and it's I'm starting to contribute in that area. So
would you say that you went through a dark night of the soul, or is that how you would describe it?
I don't know enough about that. St. John of the Cross and all that, but it was certainly
I don't know enough about it. Let me list all the people that have discussed it, and I don't know enough about those people.
But I mean,
I haven't read it in Latin.
It's a technical. It can be a technical term, or it can just, it's a use mention distinction.
If this was a black church, we would all be jumping up and down and praising God and stuff. But we're all, well, I haven't read St. John. Yes. I haven't read the latest dissertations. It depends on you.
Well, it sort of depends on what you mean by dark and soul and night and
yeah, right.
Yeah. Philosophers are just it's just
idiots.
It's just so fascinating. We just really get it. But or not. But yeah, in terms of I mean, it seems to me like that would be a good description of it. It was just, the first year was like, oh, okay. It was sort of like if we were in Ukraine right now and we were Ukrainians, you're the adrenaline's going, okay, this is what we do. And this is going to be really hard and we might die, but this is what we're doing. As Samuel Johnson said, when you're on the gallows, it focuses your attention.
Yeah.
And so I'd say that first year, it was in some ways, it was just so ridiculous. Here I am, a professor. I can't have books.
Ugh.
I moved out of my house for a while. I had kind of a hazmat suit thing, you know. I mean, it was just what's going on. And I had been thinking in the year or so prior to that, I've been kind of wondering, you know, I wonder what it would be like if I really suffered. I don't know if I can handle it. You know, my life has been really good. And so this was sort of like, well, okay, yeah, and the Lord's meeting me here, and okay, if I die, I die, you know. Yeah, and so it was hard, but it, you know, I handled it pretty well. But then it went on for another 11 years. That had its own challenge. It's just like, oh, you know, when's it going to end? And it's maybe this is never going to end, and I'm just going to be kind of limping through. That it was its own kind of dark night of the soul.
Yes, yes. Well, I
You know,
saw that you handled Y2K well, and so you handled that suffering really well. I saw that with my own
Yeah,
eyes.
there was a great deal of suffering at that time. So, oh yeah, it's January 1st. Oh, gee.
Well, Dave, as you're talking about, like, now I'm kind of coming back. It's coming back. I'm getting more involved, reaching out, and now you're back into moral arguments. I came across an article sometime in the last year that you had written. I can't even remember I came across it on the internet when I was doing a search. And it was the moral apologetics.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this is, I mean, I immediately, when I saw that you wrote it, I was like, oh, that's fitting. I got to read this. And as I read it, I really liked how it approached culture and where we're at. You know, it's almost like the pre-work
Yeah.
that needs to be done. Do you want to talk a little bit maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a thing now called moral apologetics, and so there's a series of books coming out, and so this chapter that I mentioned is kind of part of that. But the people who, and so I'm actually on the board of the Center for Moral Apologetics or something like that at Houston Baptist University, and that's really where a lot of this is happening. Some really good people there. But back when I first talked about this was over in Europe at the European Leadership Forum thing, and they specifically asked me to talk about moral objections to the gospel and so on. And I think they suggested the term moral apologetics, which I'd never heard before. And so I think maybe maybe I was the first one to use the term, you know, in terms of describing talks or something like that. But what came out of it was the article you're talking about. And so I'm really happy to see that this whole kind of movement, it includes that sort of thing, but it also includes a reinvigoration of the so-called moral argument. But my thought was, people, God is, if we think about standard apologetics, we think about pointing to the truth about God. It is true that Jesus rose from the dead. It is true that God exists, and so on. And that is necessary for someone to come to place their trust in Christ. There's certain things that they think have to be true. They have to think that, well, I guess there is a God, and so on.
Right.
But also, if we appeal to the medieval notion of the transcendentals, goodness, truth, and beauty, and the earlier thinkers thought of God as actually the ground of all of that. Those things all go together.
Right.
And God is the good, the true, and the beautiful, and so on. My view is that we are attracted, if you look at a beautiful sunset and you go, you just have to respond. You say, wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, it just calls forth, a proper response to the value of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what happens with those transcendental values. That's true. There's a certain kind of appropriate response to that. That's true. That's what we want cognitively, is we want to get onto the truth. What we want to get onto morally is the good. We say, yes, that's good. She's good. What's happening in Ukraine is bad. But we look at Zelensky and, kind of his moral heroism right now. We go, that's good.
Yeah.
We have to say yes. And the same thing with beauty. That's beautiful. And so I think as you look at different apologetic strategies and different things, you can, I think everything points to God in some way. And so all of those things are sort of channels and to recognizing God as the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so arguably, C.S. Lewis was the most balanced among those. But also argue, he wrote about all of them, and he gives them, probably the most famous moral argument is the first few chapters of Mere Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But one can make the argument that the thing that was most compelling to him was beauty.
Yeah.
And he clearly argued for the truth,
Right.
And so
it's amazing how much that right there has been a challenge to get through to folks when I'm teaching in LA. And I just use the example of, going between LMU and Pepperdine, like I did for over a decade. I'd go down PCH, and oftentimes it was during the sunset. So I'd use that example and I would say, I've never seen anybody or heard of anybody looking at a sunset like that and saying, that's ugly.
Yeah.
No, that's not, that's ugly, but but the issue of agreement is kind of a red herring, because probably is that we do agree about vast majority of beauty judgments, but that's kind of an empirical question about whether we agree.
Right.
It's not really relevant. The question is, what do you think? You really do think it's beautiful.
You really do think it's beautiful.
I don't think I'm beautiful when I look at it. It's not like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It's not in my eye.
Yeah.
The sunset is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I owe that to you, that the training that we got on that was, I think I first really carefully read Lewis I think it was in your class, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always try to have Lewis in there somewhere. So even if it was a tennis class, you might have read Lewis for me, but anyway, so Anselm is particular, St. Anselm, so 12th century Christian thinker, is famous for this particularly, but there's a strong tradition of this throughout, of what's now called perfect being theology, which is that God instantiates and exemplifies and is the ground of all perfections. And so he is the good, the true, and the beautiful, and he is the maximal, and the origin and ground of all these things. And so when we're for some people, beauty is really going to be if they can just go past, if they can look up the sunbeam, as C.S. Lewis put it, that God's up there. And so in terms of the moral argument, I think it's Bill Craig calls it the most popular and maybe the most compelling argument. I don't know if he says compelling, but I think that's probably related to the other claim that people, I know for me, that was always the thing that just really resonated. Like, God makes sense out of morality. And
Good way to put it.
so there's something deeply intuitive, and but it's more than just abstract, you know.
So your intuitions are your friend on this. Common
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
What you're saying is common sense. You can trust it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God put it there for a reason.
Right. Yeah. And
it's
you know,
evidence.
the moral argument is it is most, you know, basic intuition is, I think, as universal as that sunset example, you know. But how you know, how you spell it out is can get hugely complicated. But here's where I learned from Aristotle. To grasp something.
How do you say his name? What's his name?
Harry Stottle. He's not Harry Potter, it's Harry Stottle.
Slow down.
Okay.
Aristotle. Okay.
Yes.
Related to John Stottle.
Yeah. So, but the idea is that the way we grasp these different things is a little bit different. So the way philosophers are real, you know, most of us have a lot of facility in terms of talking about the true, what is true. And that's where a lot of the epistemology stuff comes in. And I think Aristotle would say, yeah, it's pretty simple on off right there. You know, you grasp the truth of propositions and so on. But what does it take to grasp something as good? Well, that engages more than simply your cognitive faculties. It also engages your affections and
your feelings,
your
emotions.
Yeah, your feelings, your emotions, but also your desires, your motivations, all that stuff kind of wrapped up into
Hopes.
What we can just call the affections.
Yeah.
What you care about. And so Aristotle says, you know, for someone to learn that X is good, it has to engage their affections in some way. And so this is what a lot of moral formation is for kids, is helping kids not just, you know,
Yes.
the goal is not for kids to have an argument about what's good, you know, philosophical argument, that they know this is good. Generosity is good. Truthfulness is good. It's like looking at the sunset, saying that's beautiful. Oh yes, you feel it. It motivates you. It orients you. It calls for a kind of commitment, whereas just recognizing that 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't.
Yeah.
And
do they go by your authority, your testimony, when little kids, when they're being?
Yeah, I think they do to begin with.
You don't
but
go
also,
trust your intuitions.
But the way their intuitions are formed includes
there you go.
punishment, reward, experiential stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why Aristotle says, you know, young people shouldn't take ethics, because ethics classes are on basically how to justify kind of moral principles and all that kind of stuff. But if you're somebody who doesn't give a rip about truth or generosity or anything else, you're going to learn to be a rationalist. You know, you can rationalize immoral behavior, but if you have basically the starting points,
right,
you know, then wow, yeah, good. Then let's think about how to get a bigger grasp of it, sort of deal. So anyway, you know, of course, there's a whole world there to be explored.
Sure.
But so this is where I brought it into moral apologetics, and that is that there was and a lot of people are saying things like this now. The objections to Christianity of the past were largely that it's false. You know, well, Jesus didn't really rise from the dead, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, it'd be nice if it were true.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, Christianity, it's too good to be true. You know, it's got a high moral code, but who can live according to that? And, you know, I had a friend, a student that I was kind of sharing with at Oxford, and he said, I really like the morals of Christianity. I just can't, I don't buy the metaphysics, all the, all the truth claims, but
Mhm.
I'm attracted to the moral vision of it.
Mhm.
Well, I think those days are gone now. The primary objections to Christianity now are moral, at least here in the West. It's too bad to be true, and Christians are, intolerant, narrow-minded, bigoted, racist, etc. Just name your objection, and so how do we understand that? So
Right.
my view is that giving a moral argument as simply a philosophical argument, as good as that is, and as important as that is, it's not going to convince somebody that God is good unless they're already have some, the soil has been softened or something sufficiently that they're at least open to that.
Mhm.
And
And
if
that's not the work of philosophy, is it?
no,
Okay.
not strictly speaking, no.
There's a place for it.
But I think there is a place for us to take that in, to recognize it in terms of persuasion. So
Yes.
what's going to make these truth claims believable? Well, that's going to be more than just showing that they're true.
Mhm.
Depends on the truth claim.
Yes.
So I give the example in this paper of, this is a true story. This precedes you, Lucas, at Denver Seminary, but you might have been around. Were you around when the American Atheists had their national convention in Denver?
I think I recall hearing about it, but I
Yeah.
don't know. I think I might have been in the Navy still.
Yeah. So they had their national convention over Easter weekend. And a group of us, I mean, I was friends with the president of the American Atheists in Colorado. And I knew what they were going to do, and so, there's a lot of stories we could tell, but they had a parade through downtown Denver, and the atheists, and I knew they were going to do this because one of the leaders had a sign shop. They were carrying picket signs with signs like, Mary should have had an abortion, get the church out of my crotch, and
So
other
this was
sensitive, nuanced sorts of
so this was
expressions.
not a pro Ronald Reagan
No.
event. Okay. I'm taking notes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And I like how you're taking notes with your yellow marker there, Lucas.
It's a mechanical pencil.
Oh, okay. But anyway,
I love mechanical pencils.
the only weirder people than the atheists marching in this thing were the Christians on the sideline.
The only weirder people?
Yeah. I mean, it was just brutal. There was a group of guys that were kind of on the curb,
Mhm.
on their knees, praying loudly in tongues, and kind of wafting the tongues over onto the atheists as they walked by. But the real image that is seared into my memory, and not much is seared into my memory anymore, is the guy with a big hard hat and a mechanical bullhorn mounted on it with a microphone. So it was one of these, battery operated megaphone things.
Mhm.
And as the atheists walked by, this guy's screaming into the microphone, Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you. And,
How
I
endearing.
expected the atheists to fall on their knees in faith and repentance. Oh, I get it now. Nope, didn't happen. Well, these, the propositions this guy was asserting were certainly true and important for them to know, but if somehow they didn't get the point.
Yeah.
Because of the way he said it. And that's
Sure.
an example of how,
Yeah, sure.
there's a difference between the truth of something and the believability of it.
And being able to take it in. I think a lot of people in ministry would have had in an earlier generation, kind of a more anti-intellectual generation, although I think there's anti-intellectualism all over the place still.
Yeah.
But
In all generations.
they might say, well, yeah, but you could sit down at a typewriter and write out a moral argument. That's not going to convince him either. He's not going to fall on his knees either. So what does exactly
True.
work? So
Yeah.
so
No,
it's
but so that's
what's the alternative?
That's an analogy to illustrate
Yeah.
that there's more going on.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so that's what I would say about the typed out moral argument,
Mhm.
is that I think a typed out argument for the resurrection can actually be compelling.
And it has.
And it certainly
It has.
has.
Yeah.
And I think a typed out moral argument can be compelling too, but it does require attention to the soil, so to speak. I think Aristotle's right that so let's just say that
Yeah.
there's a woman whose dad is a Baptist preacher and he abused her whole life. And then you say, well, I've got this moral argument that shows that God is good and he's the explanation for all the goodness in the world. I can imagine her saying it just can't be true.
Yeah.
She might not even be interested in reading it.
Yeah, no, I don't think she probably would be interested in reading it. And the
attention
reason is
span,
not
yeah.
because she knows it's false, it's because she thinks it couldn't be true.
Yeah.
And
maybe her nervous system's it's outside of her window of tolerance, and she's in fight or flight, or she's
that very well could be the
not
case.
shut down or whatever.
Yeah. But even if she's kind of over that, somehow has worked through all that, she probably still is not open to somebody giving an argument any more than you and I would be open to somebody. Hey, I'm a member of the Flat Earth Society, and we're having a meeting tonight, and
in Vail,
we might want to go just to kind of mock or something, but it's like, I got better things to do with my time. And
yeah.
Well,
so
go ahead. Are you going further, Dave? Because there was
cancel Flat Earth meeting.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to have this on mute. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Curtis. I can.
Well, Lucas had said a moment ago. So what's the alternative, right? And the takeaway that I got from reading that is that the alternative is essentially living
Yes.
in such a way that makes those people, it's as endearing as it may be to be screaming in a microphone. There may be a better way to live and approach people so that they can have hope and start to latch onto those pieces that you're talking about. That could be another alternative.
Yeah. So I think, to kind of tie it together, there has to be, again, Aristotle's point is that there has to be this kind of a proper sort of experience.
Yes.
Associated with coming to grasp, certain concepts and so on. And there was a time when Christians were thought to be good. And so you could give an argument, you could even give a moral argument. Oh yeah, that makes sense. But if somebody now, and I'm sure there are some people for whom that's still the case, but it's not a given anymore. And so even besides people like the young woman I mentioned, so there's a need for argument, but of a different kind, an analogous sort of making a moral argument as being good.
Yes.
And helping, so as we as we love people and do that sort of thing, that softens the soil to the possibility that this could be true.
Mm-hmm.
So the sociologists of knowledge call this plausibility. And if a real simple way to think about it is plausibility is the question, could it be true? And I say credibility is the question, is it true? And so, we just have to face the fact that in doing apologetics or whatever, that we've got both going on. And if there's a plausibility problem,
Yes,
then that's just going to filter out all of our credibility stuff. So I'm excited that there's this moral apologetics movement and it really does seem to be a movement. It's going on, but I think it really is important that it includes a real emphasis for people on, if you think about just one more quick little thing that's related, but the passage that we all appeal to for apologetics, 1 Peter 3:15, but set apart Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to give a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have. Wait a minute. And he says, but with gentleness and respect.
Mhm.
If anybody asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have, well, how many times did people do that? Well, then you look in the context there, it's all about suffering in doing it hopefully. So that's a kind of, plausibility thing, is the context, the soil, the precursor, as you said,
very
Curtis.
good point. Very good point.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot there, and it reminds me of a story you told me. I believe it was you that told me this story of a CU Boulder professor, atheist, specialized in Nietzsche. And I'm going to tee this up, and hopefully I don't fall flat on my face here. Hopefully it was you that told me this, but I think the context was whether his students, since the Bible had stopped being read in public schools, sometime in the 60s, the Supreme Court put an end to that, wrongfully, in my opinion, but in my correct opinion. But he had mentioned that his students at Boulder don't understand Nietzsche as well as the previous students. I think he had been there for 40 years at this point. And they were biblically illiterate was the issue. Was that you that told me that
Yes.
story?
Yeah.
Can you share that anecdote?
Yeah, and that's basically correct. So this guy was
What
he
was
was
his
a
name? Do you
Nietzschean.
recall?
He was a Nietzschean.
What was his name? Do you remember?
Robert Rogers.
Hmm.
The first class I took at CU as a grad student. And he was very anti-Christian. But there were probably 30 of us in the class. It quickly became basically Rogers and Horner class because he would do all this Nietzsche stuff, and there are all these biblical allusions.
Yes.
And he'd kind of, with a little wry grin on his face, he'd make some sort of joke about that. I'm the only guy getting it. So pretty soon he's just looking at me,
Fill that in. Nietzsche is not a Christian. He's a modern philosopher, contemporary, depending on how you divide it, 1900. And I think most people would say he's modern philosopher. And toward the end of the modern era, these terms are weird, but
yeah.
So he's not a Christian.
Yeah. In fact, he's definitely not a Christian. He hated Christianity.
But one more step, though, he is steeped in the Christian tradition. So he just takes it for granted that he will make an echo or an allusion to something. I'm thinking of Professor Hayes, Echoes of Scripture in the Letters of Paul, 1980s. Richard Hayes wrote this book, and then it's been taken. But echoes and allusions where you can just mention just a teeny little thing, and it, for the biblically literate, it will bring up the whole context and the whole passage. And
Yeah.
To touch on our earlier conversation as we go forward, this is a beautiful irony.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Finish the anecdote.
In fact,
finish the anecdote.
while I was right after I took this class, I was asked to speak at a Christian writers conference in Colorado on biblical illiteracy. And I use this as kind of my central,
yeah, it's very powerful. It stuck with me this whole time.
Because he would.
You were the only one in the class getting the allusions to the Bible. Yeah. Okay. So you were the only one understanding what Nietzsche was actually saying.
Yeah. And of course, there's a whole lot we could say about this. This is what E.D. Hirsch called cultural literacy. He said, you can learn certain vocabulary, you can do, phonetics and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't know the cultural background, you're going to miss a lot.
Yeah.
So the illustration I always used was in Parent Trap. My girls watched Parent Trap. I don't know if you guys, but
the original one.
There's these two girls.
Yes.
That are lookalikes. And so they switch places. And at one point, one of the girls is saying to the other on the phone, "Dad is gonna." Oh, that's right. They're twins. Right. One's raised by the mother. One's raised by the father.
Right.
On the phone, Dad's. He's going to marry this terrible woman.
Right.
She's a real Cruella de Vil.
Yeah.
The other one goes, "Oh no, well."
Good idea. Yeah. Good.
Good
example.
What does that mean? Everybody who's watching it knows exactly what it means, right? Because of the 101 Dalmatians.
Yeah.
So that's cultural literacy. If you don't know that, you have you could recognize the syllables and the letters, and you could say it properly. You have no idea what's going on. And that's kind of the way it is reading Nietzsche. If you don't have some degree of biblical literacy, because it's just steeped in this stuff. Shepherd and all kinds of stuff. And so that's what was going on. And so at one point, this guy said to me, I find the level of biblical illiteracy in our culture appalling.
Says the atheist.
Yeah. And one other interesting
little brother. Amen.
Another little thing related to the aesthetic pointers to God is that one time there was a guy another grad student in the program who was a village atheist. He was just super anti-Christian. He was, it was Bertrand Russell sort of guy. And somehow he came into conversation and Rogers said, "Yeah, he's a Bertrand Russell atheist." He said, I can't understand Bertrand Russell atheists. He said, I hear Bach's B minor mass, and I cannot simply dismiss God like that. Another one of those really memorable deals.
I would have loved to take his class.
Yeah.
Was he intimidating?
Not too bad. Again, I was a little older.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I left,
you worked out.
Actually, he's the one that kept me from being accepted as a doctoral student there in the first place, because I had gone to Denver Seminary.
Yeah.
But when I left to go to Oxford,
that was pretty normal, right? That would be pretty normal behavior for these.
Well, especially this guy, he had a history of that, and so when I left to go to Oxford, he stopped me and he said, Oxford's gain is our loss. So
that's interesting. So only the biblically illiterate are allowed to go to Boulder.
Yeah, that's right.
He had an agenda to
too much Bible.
That's right.
Can I ask about the end point to this? I hate to do it because I take it we sort of live?
We go by your. No, we're not live.
Okay, so we're going. If you want to go by my bladder,
Hold
which
on a
is-
sec. Part of the vision that we have for these things is that we're looking long term. And it's hard for people to, it's ironically hard for researchers to think of long term, how things will be remembered or if they will be remembered. And there are so many things that I've been curious of in the library that were just never covered. And
Mhm.
so that stuff is just lost. So for example, one of the things I'd like to ask you before we leave is who was your doctoral advisor at Oxford for your PhD? Little things like that, that just people don't think is important at the time. But later, it's tremendously helpful for people trying to just figure out what happened and who went where and what the dates were. You'd be surprised how many people don't even mention the dates.
Well, and even who
And-
thinks what?
Yeah. And names, specific names, being clear about terms. It just helps researchers later. I think that YouTube will be like an archive later. I think that it will be preserved for future generations, and it might be 100 years from now. You have no idea what your impact will be. And we're obsessed with who's going to watch this next week. I'm not saying you, but I'm just saying, who's going to, that's very, it's not really exactly on our goal. Our goal is to have, I'm not saying it's you, I'm just saying, well,
Yeah.
our goal is to have something valuable for a long time. And a lot of that has to do with the kind of person you were. And you're so likable, Dave. You're so likable. People will want to read your book because you're likable. And and the backstory behind it is so valuable. Who was your doctoral advisor at Oxford?
Well, I had two. I started with Anthony Kenny, who is, really a huge figure in the British intellectual landscape. He was the president of the British Academy while I was there, which is the supreme sort of body of academics.
Yeah.
And he was also the warden of Ward's, the Rhodes Fellowship, so Rhodes Scholars. And so I got to be sort of in that circle a little bit. I also had a good friend that I was sort of mentoring who was a Rhodes Scholar. But when Bill Clinton came to Oxford to receive an honorary degree, we had all the Americans, we had a special reception at the Rhodes House. So got to, shake hands with Bill and so on. But anyway, so Kenny was just a remarkable person, a really good philosopher, but who'd written on everything from, he'd written on John Wycliffe, translated a bunch of his stuff. Kenny was an agnostic, former priest. He'd written on Descartes, Leibniz, a lot on Aquinas. That's how I ended up with him.
I have
also a lot on Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's got this great series of medieval philosophy, of actually the history of Western philosophy.
Yes. Yeah.
He's, I don't know how many books he's written, probably 100. But he's even written on the politics in Ireland and on mountain climbing. Dear person.
Was not hostile to you and your take on.
No,
you wrote on Aquinas and Aquinas.
Yeah, I was doing
Aristotle.
Aristotle and Aquinas, and he was sympathetic, although he had very strong views on everything, and so we did not see eye to eye on a bunch of things, which is a little bit of a struggle. But excuse me, he was great. But then at age 65, you have to retire from Oxford. It's forced retirement. I can't remember what becoming redundant. And so we become a pensioner. Sorry, excuse me. So, and actually when he was my supervisor for my MPhil, my master's degree thesis. And when we moved to the D.Phil status, he said, I'm going to probably have to retire here before it's done. So I'll do it with someone else. So Roger Crisp was the other one. And Roger Crisp was much younger. He's an Aristotle scholar. He's also moral philosophy in general. He's now written a major work on Sidgwick. He did the translation of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics for Cambridge. Mm-hmm. Dear guy.
Sidgwick was a major ethicist, right?
Yeah. So Sidgwick was a Cambridge guy in turn of the 20th century, major utilitarian and very influential. He wrote this dense, turgid prose, but he was one of these sort of he would think through these thought experiments and he was willing to take the argument wherever it led, however implausible it might sound. Sorry, excuse me.
No problem.
And but he influenced two other utilitarians who are much more influential today. One is Peter Singer, mm-hmm. who says that Sidgwick's book, Methods of Ethics, is the greatest book ever written on ethics. Also, J.C.C. Smart, who was also an atheist, utilitarian, who actually had a debate in print, back and forth debate in print with C.S. Lewis on utilitarianism.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and he also says that Sidgwick's book is the greatest ever written. And then the third one is Derek Parfit. Parfit's not quite as known, to people as Singer, but Parfit was there at Oxford when I was there, and he was one of my teachers. So I actually studied with Parfit for one term.
Okay.
And he was a wonderful person. But he kind of channeled Sidgwick.
Okay.
He's the master of crazy thought experiments.
Yes, I remember the brain one, the split brain.
Yeah. So he's quite a piece of work. So anyway, that's Sidgwick is this influential guy on those people, and so Roger Crisp, in recent years, that's one of the big projects he's done, is to kind of bring Sidgwick in, but he's written on everything under the sun, including Aristotle. So he didn't know much about Aquinas. Kenny knew a ton about Aquinas. Kenny was one of the there was a kind of a revival of interest in Aquinas beginning in the 1960s, and Kenny was right at the heart of that. But also Norman Kretzmann from Cornell, and they, because Aquinas had been written off for many years as, well, he's just that Catholic guy that all the Catholic people have to read and all this kind of stuff. And Bertrand Russell, in his History of Western Philosophy, said, he wasn't Aquinas was not a real philosopher. He already knew the answer to the question. So, trying to figure out arguments to substantiate something, the answer to which you already know, that's not real philosophy. And so Aquinas had kind of been poisoned. Mm-hmm. Well, in the early 60s, especially, I think, with Vatican II and different things, Aquinas kind of got left behind by the Catholic Church, and other people began to discover him. And enter Anthony Kenny, mid 60s. He was one of the first D.Phils awarded at Oxford, I think. And he was a student of Elizabeth Anscombe. He was in the melting pot of all this amazing stuff. And he, as an agnostic, starts working to bring Aquinas back into the conversation. And so he has this great line about Bertrand Russell and Russell's dismissal of Aquinas. He says, again, just to repeat, Russell said, if you know the answer to the question, that's not real philosophy.
Right.
It's supposed to just be searching and then trying to find an answer. Well, Bertrand Russell's first book was written with Alfred North Whitehead. It was called Principia Mathematica. And this was back in the early part of the 20th century. And so, sorry, Kenny says, Russell's dismissal of Aquinas comes oddly from someone who, in 1903 or whenever it was written, spent 500 some odd dense pages arguing that 2 + 2 = 4, the answer to which he had known his whole life.
Wonderful. Isn't it amazing that these basic things that you can people point out? That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, now you mentioned Richard Swinburne, and we know Richard Swinburne a little bit because he came out to teach our philosophy of religion class with Doug Guyvett back in 2004. Curtis and I were both in that class, turns out. I guess we were both in your medieval and ancient ethics class, right, Curtis? Did you mention that you were in
I believe
class?
so. Yeah.
Okay.
I honestly don't remember if it was the same section.
It might
but
not be in the same semester or whatever.
Okay, well, dishonestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, dishonestly.
We had Trent Doherty on. He's an epistemologist, and he kept saying truthfully, and I eventually just said, lie to us. Anyway, he stopped and he was like, I threw him
Or,
off.
a lot people will often say, now I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
Well, finally.
Where were you
I've been
before?
waiting for it.
So wait, the context was not honesty before. So how can I interpret
That's
the
right.
fact that you
Okay.
said you're just going to be honest with
Yeah.
me?
Are you honestly telling me that, or
Yeah. So Richard Swinburne, what was his role?
what was his role?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I started again. I went over there to do moral arguments. So I was going to do a D.Phil in philosophical theology, which was Swinburne's baby. It's a kind of hybrid thing with the philosophy. They call it a faculty, philosophy faculty, and the theology faculty. And so I started, and I did an MPhil in philosophical theology. But as I progressed, I realized, I actually want to just work on the ethics stuff, not so much the philosophy of religion stuff. And so, but I did do that. So my thesis I did was, it had to have some of that in it, but it was more basically Aristotle Aquinas stuff. And so Swinburne was my supervisor for my MPhil in general.
Okay.
We were part of the same college. So we had this society at Oriel College called the Joseph Butler Society. And Joseph Butler was an alumnus of our college. He was an Anglican bishop. I can't remember when, back in the, I think, 1700s.
Yeah.
And he wrote a lot on ethics. He wrote on philosophy of religion stuff. He was great.
Mhm.
And so we had this society. Swinburne was the president of it. and I was the secretary. And so we would bring speakers in and put on events and stuff. So even when I stopped working with him as my supervisor, we continued to
Just
work on those things together. And then I mentioned it, the Oxford system is tutorials. So I had a term of philosophy of religion with Swinburne. So I'd write papers for him, and he would eviscerate them and so on. And then the next term I studied with Keith Ward, who, was he held a chair. Swinburne held a chair in philosophy of religion. He was the
was it a heavy
professor.
chair?
Huh?
Was it a heavy chair?
Well,
How
I
strong
never
was he?
personally tried to lift it, but
Yeah. Okay, so that's called a chair.
that's like it's it's what we call a chair of this and that.
Yeah.
It's like an endowed
Professor.
yeah. If you're called professor at Oxford, at least in those days,
Big
you're
deal.
called professor. That was a special deal.
Yeah.
Here we say, we might use the word professor more generically, somebody
Yes.
who teaches. But that only a few people were professors. So Swinburne
Yes.
was, and then Ward was the Regius Professor of Divinity, but he was a Kant scholar, and I studied Kant with him. I studied Aquinas with Brian Davis, and we would look at his name and we would think it's Davies, but he's Welsh. They pronounce it Davis, and he's a major Aquinas scholar. And it actually was when I was working with him, I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. This is when I changed my mind. But then I had the amazing privilege of doing ethics with Bernard Williams, and he held the chair in moral philosophy.
Oh, wow.
And we
Yeah, he's a
became
big
pretty
deal.
good. We became pretty good friends, actually. We spent quite a bit of time together. And he's an atheist,
Yes.
essentially a Nietzschean.
Mhm.
He told me he's learned more from Nietzsche than anybody else. But then somewhere in that first year is when I came up with the idea of kind of switching out of doing more philosophy of religion to more focus on Aristotle and Aquinas. And he said, that's a great idea. Swinburne said, that's a great idea. Now we have to figure out who will supervise it. And so he approached Anthony Kenny, and he hadn't had supervisees for a long time, but he agreed to do it, which was incredible. And so then once I'd finished the MPhil, if you're successful enough with an MPhil, they'll allow you to just continue on for a D.Phil. And thankfully I was. And so then that's when it became Kenny and Crisp. And then eventually Kenny had to kind of back out.
Okay.
But Swinburne was, he was a major figure there. He and Plantinga were at that time the most prominent Christian philosophers, I think, in the world.
Did you have to go into his office for the tutorial?
Yes.
And tell us about the office. Did it have a fireplace?
It had a fireplace. And it was a great experience. Yeah, it was like.
Did it look like a hobbit lived there? That's really what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, that's what you're trying to get at. Yeah, all those meetings with those guys, like when I came over and I was visiting, the first time when we stayed with Bill Craig, every one of these, they were all a little bit different from each other, but they're all just classic. Like the guy in Cambridge, and I can't think of his name, he was the most classic. He had this big, expansive, paneled room, with all these bookcases. The fire was going. They typically would have an appointment at 4 p.m. and it was dark at that time, and tea would be served. And this guy, the fire's going, the cat is on his lap. And it was just like, oh yes.
Did Swinburne use his fireplace?
I can't remember if he ever did. I think he
coal?
may not have. He was.
Did they burn coal or was it wood?
Good question.
It was small,
I-
right? It's a small
yeah,
fireplace. It's not like a large.
Not like a huge thing. Like everything in America is huge.
It's practical.
It's
a bit
practical. It wasn't tiny, but it was modest, I
Okay.
guess is a good way to say it. I think it was wood. I don't think it was coal.
It-
And I doubt that it was gas, but it might have been. In fact, yeah, it might well have been because they've been on, they've used that sort of thing for heat much longer than America. For us, it's decorative. They were serious about it, so it was probably gas.
Yeah, for our listeners, I'm just so struck as you're dropping these names, like, oh yeah, there's this guy, and Kenny and I and Swinburne and Russell, or I mean Bernard Williams, and I mean these are the giants. People need to understand these are all. I think every name you listed are giants of influence in their fields in this last century, and they're the ones that are going to be written about
Yeah.
all these ideas, and you had the privilege of studying them.
Well, they are ones that are written about, and now it's the next generation, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and
You're
as they say-
carrying that forward.
well, I don't know if I am, but my students are,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. It's Kenny he wasn't such a household name among people I knew, but
I had a
he was-
poster of him as a high school student next to the Kiss poster and the Van Halen poster.
But it's funny, Bill Alston, who was one of the leading American guys, he came to Boulder one time, and Gary DeWeese and I had breakfast with him, and so I told him that I was working with Kenny, and he just kind of sat up, and he said the last time he was in Oxford, he said, I went by Blackwell's bookstore, and in the window it says the latest from Anthony Kenny.
Wow. It's like In Excess back then, or
Yeah,
Def
yeah.
Leppard.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a couple quick Kenny stories. Excuse me. I was just always surprised by the amazing things that, connections he had. So Elizabeth Anscombe, that name's come up, she was a major figure.
You
And-
never met her, did you?
I never met her. I met her friend who their names go all together a lot, at Philippa Foote. I was in a seminar with her. And I also saw Iris Murdoch on the street. She had dementia, and she would kind of disappear, and then they had to kind of, and I actually saw her on this, I was there when she was, I think, sort of lost on the street one time. So those three are often mentioned together as, in fact, there's a new book out. I just saw being reviewed about three of them or four of them. Can't remember who the other one would be, but Anscombe was a piece of work from all I've heard. And she famously, she was a convert to Catholic Christianity as an undergrad. Pardon
From
me?
Islam? For what? From Buddhism?
No, I don't know. Maybe from atheism or just whatever. But I think as an undergrad at Oxford, she converted, and she had very strong views. And so she it was teaching at Oxford. I mean, at that time, there weren't a lot of women, as students or teachers.
Right.
But
Yeah.
so these three were powerhouses.
Yeah.
And so she famously debated C.S. Lewis at the Socratic club. I can't remember which year it was, but he had written in his book on miracles, he had written a sort of argument that was, it's very similar to what Plantinga argues, which is that basically, if evolution is true, we have no reason to trust our cognitive faculties to be getting onto the truth. They're selected for,
That was her argument.
That was Lewis's argument.
That was Lewis's argument. Okay.
That he brings it up in a lot of different places. She thought it was fallacious. So she came and she presented this paper at the Socratic Club, and Lewis was the leader of it. And people, there's lots of mythology about it. Like that's when he gave up doing apologetics and just went into writing, fantasy and all that.
I'd heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've read her account of it. Her papers are published by the University of Minnesota. Her account is, it was no big deal. I pointed out a problem and he changed it in his next edition. And we went out to dinner together, a couple of weeks later. It was no big deal. There's a whole lot more I could say about all that. But in any case, Anscombe, then she wrote this paper in 1958 called Modern Moral Philosophy.
Yeah.
In which she coined the term consequentialism in that paper. And that many people say that was the beginning of the revival of virtue ethics and in analytic philosophy. But she was a student of and very close friend and collaborator with and translator of Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was over at Cambridge. And her writing style is kind of Wittgensteinian, which is to say,
hard to read,
unintelligible.
Yeah.
But
that's unfortunate.
Yeah. But then when Wittgenstein died, she was awarded his chair at Cambridge. So she's a major figure.
Yeah.
And so Kenny was a student of Anscombe.
We just had Alex Plato on last week, and he wrote his dissertation. He's a Biola grad. He might have had your class. He wrote his dissertation on Anscombe, and we went on for about 3 hours, and he didn't, we barely scratched the surface, but so people who are paying attention will have heard that name before.
Yeah. Okay. So she, so things would come up in my times with Kenny. Like I would give a kind of standard interpretation of her 1958 paper. And he would say things, well, Elizabeth, he would push back and say, but she was so committed to natural law and stuff. I don't know how she could, how it would be appropriate to interpret her that way. Kind of deal stuff. Oh, wow, okay. And in fact, she said once in an interview, I don't think there's a thought I've ever had that didn't come from Wittgenstein. It wasn't originally from Wittgenstein. And Kenny said in an interview, I'm not sure there's a thought I've ever had that didn't originally come from Elizabeth.
Wow.
Now, both of them being excessively generous, I'm sure, to their teacher, but but anyway, so it was really wonderful for me to be able to kind of get in on some of that. And then another thing, interesting thing that happened was one time he was getting ready to give a presentation on what? Well, on Tyndale and on the Bible and the translation, English translation of the Bible. I said, why? He said, well, it's Tyndale's 500th anniversary, and because I was one of the translators on the New Jerusalem Bible, I've been asked to give a paper. So related to that, one time I was walking through Oxford when I was over there in the summers. I would go over there in the summers and teach and meet with him. And when I was back in Boulder, and during the year, and so I ran into Jean Porter, who is a moral theologian at Notre Dame that I had gotten to know a bit, and her husband, blanking on his name, but he's an older British Old Testament guy.
Do you know his social security number? I could look it up really quick.
Yeah, it's escaping me, but I did the last 4 digits.
There, last 4 is all I need.
Yeah, but I'm blanking on his name right now. But anyway, I'd not met him, and so I met him, and he said, you know what he did? I said, well, tomorrow I'm meeting with Anthony. Oh, Tony. He said, yes, we worked together on the Jerusalem Bible. I guess that was the first time I had heard that. I said, what else has he done? You know, so I met with him, and he said, yeah, we worked together on Job, or we worked together on something.
I think he meant
I
job.
guess it was Job.
I think he meant job.
Job. Oh yeah.
I don't know why people have such a hard time.
Yeah, I know. I've been looking for a job for a long time there, but I think it's just before Psalms.
It's a part-time job.
Yeah. So anyway, the next day I'm meeting with Kenny. He says, "Oh yes, I said, I didn't know you. So you translated some Old Testament for the. I didn't know you were a Hebrew scholar." He said, "Well, I do know Hebrew, but no, the role the Jerusalem Bible was originally a French Bible, and then they wanted to make it into English, so they were concerned to translate it well from French and go to the original languages." So he said, I was translating from French. But you know what? Another interesting little tidbit is, who was the principal translator for the Jerusalem Bible for Job, also known as Job? A guy named J.R.R. Tolkien.
Wow.
And so Kenny must have worked with him on that as well.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So here's a quick update on, or as long as I'm telling Anscombe stories. So, and then this is, I think, what part of it's what you're alluding to. You alluded to earlier, Curtis, that so back in about 89 or 90, I was part of a pro-life conference thing on talking. It was concerned euthanasia. It was at Stanford, and they had a speaker there who'd never been to one of these things before, and I'm blanking on his name, John somebody, and he was the president of the Thoreau Society, and a philosopher at the University of Minnesota, and an atheist. But he was pro-life. And I just remember some lesser light guy got up and he said something about Plato or something. And then John gets up and he says, well, actually what he said was, I thought, cool. So this is when I'm beginning to pursue all this, and I said, so I went up to him. This was probably like 88 or something. And I'm at the University of Colorado, and I'm pursuing this, but again, I hardly know anybody. I said, could we have breakfast? So we had breakfast. And it turns out, he said, well, yeah, I really think highly of planning. But you know who I think is the greatest Christian philosopher today is Elizabeth Anscombe, and her husband, Peter Geach, who's also a fine Christian philosopher. And he said, I'm actually related to them. My daughter is married to their son, or vice versa.
Wow.
And they're great people. Okay, wow. So I kept up with him. And I was involved in a nonviolent civil disobedience thing at an abortion clinic, and was arrested. And this is not too long before I went over to Oxford, and I remember being in a phone call with this guy. And I told him that, and he said, I wish I had the courage to do that. And he said, Elizabeth Anscombe does that. In fact, she was just arrested at an abortion clinic in London recently, and she's 80 some years old, and she was kind of manhandled and thrown into a paddy wagon, and I'm concerned for her. And I'm holy cow, really? So I get over to Oxford. A couple of years into it, I go to a seminar thing, a special lecture by Ronald Dworkin. And here in the audience is Bernard Williams and John Finnis, who is like the premier natural law guy. And he held the chair, the professorship in law at Oxford.
Neil
And
Gorsuch did his D.Phil under him now.
he
He's
trained
on the Supreme
Neil
Court.
Gorsuch, yeah. But he also trained not a D.Phil, but well, yeah, maybe. I know they're good friends. Is Robert George at Princeton.
Yeah, that's
So,
correct.
And Finnis helped me with one of my chapters, so I had one appointment with him.
Yeah.
But this is before that. So I introduced myself to him. Oh, you're John Finnis. I said, I just wanted you to know I'm real involved in pro-life stuff in the United States, and I understand. It's one of those conversations you just so memorable. I said,
your
I
first foot forward
understand.
was about what you understand.
Yeah, I understand that Elizabeth Anscombe was arrested, at an abortion clinic recently. I've done a little bit of that. I understand that she was arrested. He says, yes, I'm her attorney. I just thought, okay, the world is too great.
I love that story.
And I would have been happy if that was the end of the story. But you guys don't know Curtis, there's still more to this.
It gets better.
So I moved back, and Elizabeth Anscombe eventually dies. And there's an obituary in First Things Journal written by John
Finnis.
And he honors her Christian faith. He brings up the fact that she was involved in pro-life stuff. He says, it's seldom mentioned in the literature about Elizabeth Anscombe is this fact and all this kind of stuff. And it was very warm-hearted about her faith and everything. It was in First Things. I thought, wow, that's cool. I was not in touch with him. So here's the final piece of this. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, the Center for Christian Thought here at Biola had they would have these big deals, and there was a banquet thing, and Martin Marty, the church historian guy, came and spoke and stuff. And I was part of the center that semester, and Richard Mao, who's the president of Fuller at the time, Fuller Seminary, who is a philosopher, a fine philosopher, he was there. And I went out to go to the bathroom, and he's out there in the hallway. So I'd never met him. I introduced myself to him. By the way, he's a storyteller. I just was told that the other day from Mike Nichols at our church. And so he starts asking me questions. Well, where'd you go? Oxford. Oh, who'd you study with? Anthony Kenny. Oh, Anthony Kenny, and he knows him. And he says, now, did you ever have any interaction with Elizabeth Anscombe? I said, no, and he said, well, I've got a story to tell you about that. And I'm not kidding you. I was virtually in tears as he's talking. And I'll probably lose it here. He said, when I was in grad school at the University of Chicago, I had a professor named John blank.
This is Richard Mao, former president of Fuller.
He's talking. And John was my supervisor. And I hadn't brought up John. Yeah.
John Finnis was his?
No, John is the guy that blank. I can't think of his last name.
Okay.
The son-in-law of
Speaking.
Elizabeth Anscombe.
Yeah.
The
Gotcha.
atheist pro-life guy. He said, I don't know why I can't think of his name, but John somebody. And he said he was my professor and he gave me the hardest time about being a Christian. He just was all over me. He said, and a couple of years ago, Mao says, I get a call. And the guy says, is this, Richard Mao? Yeah. Did you do a PhD at the University of Chicago? Yeah. Well, I'm John blank. I don't know if you remember me. Oh yeah, I remember you. He said, and I recall that I gave you a really hard time for being a Christian. And I wanted to contact you and apologize for that and to let you know that I've become a Christian.
Wow.
Through, the influence of my in-laws,
Wow.
Elizabeth Anscombe and Peter Geach and their children. And I just wanted to,
Wow.
let you know.
Wow.
Wow.
So the story goes on.
Yes.
And so then I was able to kind of fill him in on some of my stuff
Yeah.
with him because he also knows the guy.
That's crazy. You met you observed this guy in 89, 90, whenever that was at Stanford, and completely unrelated. And then you went and had your life and he went and had his life.
Yeah.
And then it all came back.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Dave, I originally only wanted to interview you about the fireplace in Swinburne's office.
sorry, the answer wasn't that great.
That was pretty much what we were trying to lead up to the whole time. And
Okay.
And then I just wanted to double check. So you didn't get an associate's degree at Oxford. It was higher than that?
It was an associate's in cosmetology.
So you got,
but then they thought that like cosmology, and then then it just went on from there.
I noticed you were pronouncing it differently than so it's not Oxnard Community So I mean, we're just blown away by all these stories, and we've loved having you on. And Dave, this is you are a never ending well to draw from, as is evident. And the personal stuff is, I think, just as important as the technical stuff that people read. Just the human element of philosophy, I think, would just blow people away, what that's like. And I just really appreciate you modeling that for us today. And I think it will be valuable for years to come.
Well, the vision that you obviously have for this, I think is so important. I think I have thought for quite a while that the story of what came about here at the Talbot philosophy program is worthy of a book.
Yes.
Somebody needs to archive this stuff. And
absolutely.
So
and multiple
I love
types
that
of
you
media.
want to do that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
As part of this. It's really.
And I hope
great.
that the parts about having cigars and drinking and the policy changes and stuff is a part of that story as well. And I hope that that all gets documented and at least multimedia. It doesn't have to just be a book, but we're looking forward to part 2 of this, if there ever is one, if you want to come back at some point in the future.
We'd
But
love it.
we'll go
be
ahead and
fun.
tie this off here. Thank you, Dave Horner, D.Phil from Oxford University. Let me scratch out associates. Associate of Applied Science is what I had. I don't know why. Okay, so and not Oxnard, it's Oxford,
Ford.
and that was
It means a place
in-
where the oxen
England.
would go over the little river.
Oh, it's not in.
It's
Middle
not like
Earth.
Ox Chevy
Right.
or Ox Pontiac or Honda or anything. That's what the Ford is about.
And it's not in Middle Earth. It was in. I see. I had that.
Well,
wrong, too.
kind of pretty close to Middle Earth, actually.
It's not in Narnia.
No.
Well, thank you for joining us. We'll sign off.
Okay. Thank you.